So I hope that, you too can remind yourself why you love doing what you do and why it's worth it, even if other people don't see value in it. And that almost always happens with any creative field or creative person because the culture around us just does not nurture creativity. It's easier to be like everyone else than it is to do your own thing.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Oh My Curry Goodness. My name is Hamza Islam. On each episode of this podcast, I talk to Gen Zers who are doing incredible things in their respective fields, about their story, and how they became the person they are today. When it came to naming the podcast Oh My Curry Goodness, I broke it down into two parts. When we hear stories that are really interesting or inspiring, or stories that have shaped a person into who they are today, we say oh my goodness. And I added curry because, as someone who is South Asian, one of our favorite dishes is curry, chicken curry to be specific. And so that's when I came with the name Oh My Curry Goodness. However, my goal for this podcast is to talk to my guests as a human being because while they have done incredible things in their respective fields, it's important to focus on what has led them to who they are today and letting them be as authentic and vulnerable as possible so that we can have a unique connection. And I hope that you guys as listeners also find a unique connection with the guest. And so I really want my podcast to be a human podcast where we just talk to not for who they are, but for what they are. And I hope you take valuable lessons from each guest because while they're in the middle of their story, they can help you find your path, whether you're in the middle of your own story or whether you're just starting yours. So I hope you guys continue to check back each and every week to see all the incredible Gen Zers on this podcast. This week I am talking to Sara Abou Rashed, who is a poet, speaker, and storyteller who is passionate about change-making initiatives, especially when it comes to the arts, youth, women, and immigrant and minority communities. At the age of 8, she was called an inspiration for her poetry, and in 2018, Sara wrote and starred in her debut one-woman show called A Map of Myself, where she discusses topics such as identity, belonging, immigration, and finding home. Now, as cool as it is with all the accomplishments she has had, it's also cool to connect with someone who also has a connection to Columbus, Ohio. And I may or may not be biased, but maybe the greatest city in the world. But nevertheless, it's great to connect with someone who has Columbus, Ohio roots. So, Sara Abou Rashed, thank you so much for joining Oh My Curry Goodness.
Thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor.
Yeah, it's always great to connect with someone who has Ohio roots because there's always those shirts that say Ohio against the world, and it's true. But I know, and this is where I want to start because I know obviously you grew up in Columbus, but you're actually, correct me if I'm wrong, from Syria, if that's correct.
So there are a few stops on the journey. I always like to say I'm originally Palestinian. I was born and raised in Syria up until the age of 12, 13, and then I came to the US.
Okay.
And yeah, I claim my Ohio roots pretty hard. I've been here for over 10 years, but I've also lived in Michigan for 2 years just
Okay.
for grad school. Yeah. So still
Well,
rooting for the Buckeyes, but
yeah, that's it. That's funny. You started off great, and then you went Michigan. It's like, oh well. But well,
that
no, it's
that's
okay. Um, One of the first things I want to talk about is I've had a lot of conversations with previous guests, especially those who have immigrant backgrounds. They came from one country and then they settled into another. And my experience with moving from one place to another is simply moving from one house to another house. And I saw the difficult challenges that it came through because of whether it's money purposes or just lifting all your furniture from one house to another. It's not the best, it's not comfortable. But moving from one country to another has its own has is much more difficult than moving from one house to another. And especially going to a country like the United States where it's a different environment, different culture, different way of living. It's not easy to fit in. Forget all the other things that come with survival. Just trying to fit in is difficult. I want to start by asking you, I call it the teddy bear, which is for example, when you go to sleep and you have a thunder
Mhm.
and there's a thunderstorm out there, one of the things that I used to hold on to was a teddy bear, so that even though it's still scary, there's something that kind of helps you navigate through the night. I know I am known for using bad examples on this podcast, but what I do want to ask is when you're going through that early stages of trying to adapt to a country like the United States, what were some things that you kind of held on to that even though that challenge was difficult, that you
Mhm.
held on to, for lack of a better term, hope in a way?
Mm. Such a beautiful question, and I love that teddy bear metaphor because it makes it real, right? I think we all have our literal teddy bears and our figurative. I would say moving from a country to another is probably more similar than moving from one house to another than people think it is. You are carrying everything you've collected, all the memories, all the emotions that come with it, plus the added layer of language and society. So that could be your neighborhood, right? Who end up being your neighbors? Um, what does their morning and day look like? How often do you interact? So for me, it's been really difficult moving, but I think it's also become kind of a norm in a way, unfortunately, because we all look for stability and hope to stay in one house or in one country for a long time. So my teddy bears in those moves would be, frankly, my mother. I'm an only child, and I am very close to my mother in a way that she's more my friend than, an authority figure in my life. Um, and she's constantly been supportive and a source of comfort and inspiration.
Yeah, I love the fact I love how you said that your mom is less of an authority, more as a friend.
Mhm,
And oh, I just forgot where I was going to go with this. I think it's the same way I see my parents, where it's like it's a human thing. Because
mhm,
again, I one of the things I say on my podcast is it's not about who they are, it's about what they are. Your parents
mm,
are the who they are, but they're
mhm,
also human beings and they're also experiencing the same thing. And having this small community in a way,
mhm,
even though it's difficult, it's something that you're all going through and you're helping each other navigate through those difficult moments.
mhm.
I do want to ask you, because I know we talked a little bit
Mhm,
about the
mhm.
Columbus, Ohio roots,
Yeah.
but looking at how you where you grew up, I know that one of the things I got to when I read about you is that you still take great pride in where you come from. Sans the Columbus, Ohio moment, I'm talking about like Palestine and Syria. So I'm curious to know what are some things that Palestine, Syria, what do they have that the United States doesn't? Because
Mhm,
even though you are here in the United States, there are certain things where it's like you have this like deep connection with the places you come from, and so it's like, yeah, I live here, but oh, they don't have this. But where I used to grow up, they had all this, and it's plays a it kind of like brings back good memories in a way.
absolutely. I think, back to the becoming a collection of everything we've lived and kind of a combination of things we've inherited and things we've created for ourselves. So even though I've been in the US for over 10 years, and I think it's much more easier to blend in here as a child than it is for our parents, for example. Um, the reason I still hold on to the Palestinian and Syrian is because I find that I'll never truly be American, as in, um, what everyone thinks American is when they hear the word. And that immigration story, no matter how many years pass by, will continue to be relevant. And for me, the Arab community is a big community here, and we have a lot of roots. And it's incredible to still speak Arabic, to still hear it on the streets, or to find the other person who looks like you in a classroom or in a conference. So those are all about, I think, identities are all about moments of connection. So whenever we identify with something, we're hoping to connect with others over it.
I am not. I don't know if I told you this. I am
Mhm.
not Middle Eastern. I'm a person of
Mhm.
South Asian descent, and so It feels like there's a billion of us in Columbus, Ohio, but I I do appreciate how you talked about some of the things that where you grew up they have, and I'll give you an example. I mean, even though it's home to home, not country to country, what I will say is moving from one house to another, where I used to live, I knew a lot of the people that I grew up
Mhm,
with, and even though I went to the same school, it's just that I think it was just that proximity
mhm,
to other people. So like my neighbor, I mean like the house next to me, I had
mhm,
like a neighbor that went to the same high school or the same school as me. But then in my new neighborhood, the one that I'm currently in, it's like it took me a long time before I realized there were more people who went to the same school as me. But in my old neighborhood, it was like, oh, I knew, like I already knew. But with like the new one, it's like 3 or 4 years after I moved in, it's like, wait, you live here, you live here, you live here. So it's weird, but in a way, you have that deep connection because it's like, you know, it's a memory in a way. Um, and yeah, that's how I wanted to end it.
mhm.
For I want to now you mentioned how you have an immigrant background, but you're also Muslim, and I do want to talk about this because I am also Muslim, hence the name Hamza Islam.
Yeah.
And it's this is a really these kinds of conversations are interesting to me because we are Muslim. We have this is like a part of us, but we're growing up in a place where there are a lot of people who are different from us. And unfortunately, we have those very extreme people who are like who have anti-immigrant rhetoric or anti-Muslim rhetoric, or unfortunately both. And I want to talk about what your shield or what has been your shield during these difficult moments because I am not an immigrant. I grew up in the United States, so I just only relate to the Muslim part. My dad, however, moved to the United States from Bangladesh to study in the United States. And growing up in Kansas or going to school in Kansas, growing up at a place where not many people were very kind to immigrants, that is a difficult challenge. So I'm these are the situations where it's not your fault. These are things that are out of your control. Tell me a bit about what is your shield that protects you from all these bad things that either you've experienced or currently experiencing, or hopefully this doesn't happen. Hopefully I don't intend it to be in a harmful way, but it's like things that you might potentially experience in the future. What has your shield been that has helped protect who you are as a person?
Really beautiful questions, right? I love that you're asking about, what brings us comfort, what brings me, protection now. I think uh, no one will ever love us for whatever we are. We will always be criticized for one thing or another, right? Whether you're Muslim or not Muslim, you're Arab or not, you're an immigrant or not, there will always be someone against your very being. And unfortunately, it's very hard to protect against all of that. Some of it, I've experienced things in high school where it felt more direct and um, more personal. But we also now see social media where people feel a lot more free to spread hate or leave hurtful comments on other people's things and attack their identities without knowing anything about them. So for me, I'd like to create a distance between, what people perceive and who I really am. Because people who know you on the inside, they really would react differently. And it's I think the world prepares us for heartbreak, and I think it prepares us for being vulnerable. And it's not possible to be protected all the time. What can give us protection is continuing to be kind. And for me, Islam is all about being the best version of ourselves, the kindest version of ourselves. And if I'm the only Muslim someone meets, then I want to be a good Muslim. I want to leave a good impression. And that to me matters most, more than the hate that they may direct at me. Um, so that gives me hope and, kind of alleviates responsibility on my part because I I want to, be remembered for being a good person, and whatever someone does to me, that's on them.
There's a few things I want to talk about because there were a couple of points you made, like being a kind person, that I'm like, oh, we gotta dive into this a little bit more. But one thing I want to add, and I'm curious to know about your thoughts on this, because I think hypothetically, a lot of people want to be remembered for being kind, being nice to people. But I feel as if in the world we live in different communities, I think it's easier to be mean than nice.
Mhm.
And the reason why I say that is because all of us at some point will run into a conflict, regardless of how big or small the conflict is.
Mhm.
However, no one sees a conflict and or sorry, let me backtrack. It's hard to be kind during conflict. And so, yes, hypothetically, you and I could say
Mhm.
hi to each other and appreciate one another for each other's work. But then sometimes when you run into a disagreement, the niceness kind of gets thrown
Mhm.
out of the window, and now you see arguments, disagreements, fighting, and not necessarily physical, hopefully not physical, but definitely those fightings. I'm curious to know your thoughts. Do you feel like it's actually easier to be mean nowadays than it is to be nice, or do you still feel like it's
Mhm.
still easier to be nicer than to be mean?
Mm. That's a hard question. I think it's actually easier to be nice because it's different, right? If everyone is used to the meanness, or let's call it even just distance, general distance and lack of um, connection and friendliness, then the moment you are the opposite of that, you really stand out. And I hope, that it's not very hard to be nice, but I also see what you mean, and that um, people might genuinely feel more disconnected than ever. About disagreement, I think niceness here may not be, um, not disagreeing. We can still disagree, but it's really about not trying to force conclusions or assumptions or speak on someone's behalf. So we can have a disagreement and still say, what exactly do you mean? What are you thinking about? What was your idea here? So coming from a place of curiosity instead of a place of assumptions, and, oh, this person is intending to harm me, this person is naturally evil and malicious. um, what happens if we don't think that way?
Yeah. Wow. It's interesting. Now I feel like I'm worried people are gonna listen to this and go, "Is Hamza a mean person?" Because you said it's easier to be no, but and the thing is, I think both of us can be right in a way, because well, I don't. Yeah, no. Both of us can be right in a way because, coming from your place, you advocate for a place of niceness, and you think
Mhm.
that there are moments where you can still be kind, even in disagreement. And I
Mhm.
think what's important to know, because I know you're also involved in politics in a way, is that when people disagree, their intention is never to harm or like to actually. They're not trying to what's the word? Disrespect you. They're coming from a place of a different perspective that's different from you, right? So everyone has a story or everyone has a experience that they have. It's not about good or bad. It's just how they see things. And in those instances, I can totally understand where you're coming from. And I can also understand the fact that unfortunately we do live in a country where people have these extreme groups and it's like, oh, you're this, we must attack this person. And so I don't know. I want to live. I don't know. Maybe because I'm still at a process or in a journey where it's like I feel like I've been more. I want to try to be nice, but
Mhm.
it's definitely challenging. I want to talk about a couple of things about religion before we talk about your creativity journey.
Mhm.
And I want to start by asking you one of my favorite questions on this podcast, which is a before and after of who you are. And so, for example, as someone who loves Wheel of Fortune, one of my favorite game shows, they'll have advertisements, and then I'll see advertisements where you'll see a person take some sort of product, like a medicine
Mhm.
product or whatever, and it's like
Mhm.
a before and after. Before what a person looks like before taking the product, and then what a person looks like after taking the product. I want to play hypothetical here, and because you are very proud of who you are as a Muslim, I had a mental health activist who talked about what her relationship with faith looked like because she was a born again Christian. So I asked her, what would it, I guess, how has faith changed you in a way? I want to ask from a Muslim perspective, how has faith played a part in who you are as a person? And what do you feel like what do you feel like you would not have if you didn't have faith? Obviously, that's a personal question. It varies from person to person.
Yeah.
But what would you say faith gave you that if you didn't have it, or if you didn't get into faith,
Hmm.
you didn't have this attribute or characteristic?
Mm. Yeah, these questions are really making me think. I've thought about some of that for myself, honestly. Because I think, when you're Muslim and living in America, you become aware of faith pretty early on, and you start to notice what that does to you and how it guides your life. And, for us, we always say Islam is not just a one day a week or a prayer. It's truly a lifestyle. And for me, it's in the way I think. It's in, you know, back to politeness, back to being a generous friend or a kind colleague or classmate. Faith has plays a part in all of this. It has also made me a stronger and braver, woman, an immigrant, because I can proudly wear the hijab and still um, take leadership and still do really hard things that people don't usually associate with Muslim women, even though Islam gave us the right to do all of that, and it encourages us to get an education, to play an active part in society. Um, so it's really truly ingrained in all of the details and the little moments of our lives. And for me, it holds me to higher moral grounds that if I weren't religious, I would think, oh, maybe you can get away with more. But no, now you're held to higher standards.
I would say what I kind of answer these questions broadly in the sense that
Hmm.
faith gives me a direction
Hmm.
in a very, those kind of, if you've ever taken that, if you ever gone on a road trip and you don't exactly know where you're going, I think faith in a way is like your GPS. And
Hmm.
whenever you take a wrong route, it says recalculating. And so what I will say is when I was little, I think my relationship with faith was more like, oh, I have to do these things because your parents tell you this, or if you went to an Islamic school or Sunday school, Islamic school,
Hmm.
in these cases, they'll tell you that you need to do these things. But the key word is you need to, you have to. And it's important because they're educating you. But then as you get older, I think there's a cool thing about switching from a I have to do this to I want to do this. Because now, like you said, it's about a lifestyle and you get to spend time with, and I'm not talking about Islam, it could be about any religion, in case there's a viewer that's not Muslim and just decides to turn this off. But there's like a sense of like curiosity you have towards your specific religion. And so even if you read the Quran, the Bible, or the Torah, no one's forcing you. It's now you get to spend time and understand why, like what are the messages behind these things or behind the words, and then understand more about the stories because it's not just a story. There's a significant meaning, or there's like a purpose or a lesson you can take away. So I don't know. I kind of went on a ramble here, but that's kind of where I see. I don't know if that's how you see it, where it's like
Abs- yeah,
going from a
I
want, like a have to a, oh, actually I really want to learn this, and so that it can help me have a better relationship with my faith.
absolutely. And I think people frankly need religion, because we're humans who get sick very easily and who are really weak, and we need to be reminded of our weakness and to be humbled, right? So I faith kind of takes away that arrogance and that ego from us, because again, we get sick easily, things happen, people die easily. So it gives us purpose. And I love the way you said, it's like a GPS, it gives us direction, truly, because it organizes our lives, it gives purpose, and frankly, a lot of peace. I know that people who are more religious tend to be more peaceful in general because they um, they have hope that they're doing something for a bigger purpose. And it's it's hard not to have faith when you look at how beautiful everything around us is and how everything moves within um, calculation, from seasons to days to hours to the sun. So I struggle not to believe, and I'm thankful that I do believe. If that makes sense.
For sure. One more question before we talk
Yeah.
about the creative journey that you've taken, and
Mhm.
especially with poetry. Um, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, which is what should I focus first? Should I focus on being a good human being, or should I spend more time with faith? Like in terms of like, okay, like when we think about like what's like the best way to, hypothetically, let's, because this, I don't think we'll ever have, I don't think a person will exist in the sense that like they're never going to be like the most noble perfect human being in the
Mhm.
world. I don't think we'll ever reach that because
Mhm.
humans make mistakes. But I am curious to know, do you think, in terms of like finding the first step to I want to be a better person, do you think it's more important to focus on the religion part? And I'm not talking about just Muslim, it could be any
Mhm.
religion. Do you feel like the first step to being a good human being is to focus on spending time with your religion? Or do you think the first thing is more of like go on that personal development training? And
Mhm.
what I mean by that is there are a lot of good Muslims, or a lot of good religious leaders who are very well in, like who are very well, who know a lot about the religion, but can sometimes be harsh or mean to people who
Mhm.
have some sort of disadvantage.
Mhm.
So that's why I feel like having that personal development is needed first before you go into religion. I'm curious to know, do you feel like it's important to focus on religion first or the personal development? I guess in terms of like that first step to becoming a better human being.
I think both inform each other. It's kind of a feedback loop and a cycle where if you decide to become a better person, you will become better in all areas of your life. You'll become a better child, friend, colleague. You'll want to take care of all areas of your life. And I yeah, I see how these are separate, but I also see them as very connected, frankly, because even if you want to improve your body movement, your mental health, all of that, finding some religious or spiritual practice will also help you find peace in other areas. So just begin, whichever whichever way it makes sense for you.
For sure. Couldn't agree anymore. Now, switching gears, let's talk about this poetry journey, or this creative artistry that you've taken. And I want to go back to the root of everything because you are obviously involved in poetry. I am obviously a podcaster, even though I don't like that term yet because I'm not that popular of a podcaster. But I want to start by talking to you, asking, as someone who loves poetry, what were some stories that you grew up listening to that you feel like that have played a big part in who you are today? And I'll give you an example. So with podcasting, believe it or not, some like what kind of led me into podcasting was just being able to hear stories from people that I kind of grew up with. And so I remember I had a friend telling me that she went to therapy. And what was really weird about it was I always felt like, and I kind of feel bad for having this belief, but it's like you kind of have an idea of what a person who goes to therapy looks like. But here was someone who I was like, I called her like one of the smartest people I've met,
Mhm.
one of my really good friends, and yet she said she went to therapy because she was going through a difficult experience. And it's like, wait, you mean like people who you think are doing really good can
Yeah.
also go to therapy? So why I created this podcast is I wanted to talk to inspiring people, but then being able to share those stories where they went through difficult moments, or those moments where you were not 100%. So that's what kind of led me to going into podcasting. For you, someone who's involved in poetry, what were some stories you grew up listening to that you were like, this, if because of these stories, here I am today being able to share my love for poetry.
Mm. So I started becoming a poet when I was really young and listening to my grandmother's stories. My grandmother was born in Palestine and had to flee when she was 3 in 1948. And the entire time, I was growing up, I was listening to these stories and hearing her recite old poems that she memorized since she was a child. So I've quickly become, enamored with language and storytelling. And that's how I started writing my own since I was 6. So I began writing in Arabic next to my grandmother. She'd give me a line and we'd add to it and expand on it and do different things. And to this day, she still, you know, tells stories that somehow make it into my poetry, even though my poems have evolved into a different language that my grandmother doesn't know anymore. Um, so it's interesting. Storytelling, I think, is the root of many of our passions. And, hearing those stories and knowing the story of Palestine and knowing that people are needed to document that because it continues to be relevant. Here we are, more than 75 years later, still struggling with erasure, with um, genocide, with documentation. And we want to document the stories of our people in all ways possible. So being a poet for me was an easy choice in that sense.
Well, one of the things before we talk about storytelling, one of the things I want to do is learn Arabic, and I've been trying to do that. It's a work in progress, but I honestly I really love the language. I remember going to Dubai in the summer of 2022, and I'm like, oh, if only I knew how to speak Arabic. So I'm gonna work on that. But what I really love about storytelling and what my view on storytelling is that storytelling in a way is representation in the sense that you have a story, whether it's a fictional character or a non-fictional character, going through certain moments in their life and doing something special, or there's some sort of story where you're like, oh, this resonates with me. I don't know, maybe it may not be 100%, but there's a part of you where you think to yourself, oh, this reminds me of what I'm going through. And so storytelling, in a way, two words come to mind: representation, because a character is representing potentially millions of people, and then hope, because people always say, there's always that cliche term, stories have a happy ending. But in a way, it's true, or in a way, yeah, it's true, because the reason why happy endings exist, whether it's fictional or non-fictional, is because there's hope in knowing that even though they're going through difficult moments in their life, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know. I don't know if that's something you agree with. And I'm trying to be careful because I know that there are certain stories, kind of like how I said in the beginning, where no one's story is done. There are many stories where it's either in the beginning or we're still in like the middle in some sense. Kind of like if we talk about what's going on in Palestine, there is no, like, we're still, unfortunately, people are still suffer or going through difficult moments. There's no end. It's still like, I don't know if you want to say the beginning or the middle. I don't know. I'm trying to be careful with what I say, but hopefully if that makes sense. Just trying to be careful.
Yeah, no, I completely hear you. I think we're almost always in the middle, right? Because we don't know where and when stories start, but we know that they need documenting, and representation is a big part of it. I think maybe fiction and novels and even film and movies struggle with that a little bit more because people hold on to characters as placeholders for entire populations. But in more realistic storytelling, the goal is truly to humanize every single person and to present them as they are. My hope is that we we move away from representation because we want to be able to see individual stories and to make space for them. And even if you have two people from the same street, the same family, the same household, the same identities, they will still be different. So representation sometimes is another word for stereotype, and that we're still struggling to dismantle, unfortunately.
Yeah, and one thing I would want to add before we move on, to
Mhm.
transition to the next question, is to always have an open mind, because even though representation is important, kind of you also made a great point that if we take representation in a bad way, we might fall into these stereotypes. and then now all of a sudden our minds are closed. So it's really important to understand, to have as much of an open mind as possible so that you understand everyone's point of view. Now, as a creative person, I want to know your relationship with, or how your relationship with creativity has changed since you first started. Because I'll be honest with you, Sarah, I know we just met for the first time,
Mhm,
but if you were to ask me, I think when it comes to like my philosophy on interviewing, I think I focus too much on perfection. And I
mhm,
used to say, I actually said this and I've said this in the past, where I used to think perfection, in order to be great at what you do or earn the respect of people
mhm,
with your work, you have to be perfect. And what I've learned, whether it's in poetry, sports, podcasting, acting, theater,
mhm,
whatever that may be, creativity needs to have some sort of up and down journey instead of a very straight line where it's like this is how it has to be. And while it's great to have high standards, it's impossible to be perfect because there's always room to grow. Tell me a bit about what your relationship with creativity has looked like. Did you ever feel like you had to worry about perfection? Was that something that you struggled with at some point, or do you feel like you kind of are just free from this weird prison that people could potentially put on you?
I'm similar actually. I think I I must be a perfectionist in some way because, um, even during college and undergrad, it was really hard for me to turn in anything slightly less than great. And that's a big source of trouble for me because it sometimes means that I might be late starting something simply because I just don't know how to get into it or I don't know how to start it. So in academic writing and in regular classes, that was a big issue where, not knowing felt like a failure. But in creativity, I think what's freeing about it is that no one knows what perfect anything looks like. So we don't know what a perfect poem is, or a perfect painting, or a perfect film, because there is so much room for subjectivity and your own personal standards. Um, so that for me is freeing. I write poems knowing that I'm the only one who can write what I personally write, or the stories that I carry and the stories that I've heard. And that to me is a great source of, continued creativity. Because if I thought of it as a standard or as a graded thing, I don't know that I will keep writing, but I do know that we keep improving every time. No matter how terrible, we have some things, they get better. They always get better.
Okay, so here's my story when it comes to turning in papers.
Mm,
I'm a computer science major, but I have taken classes where I would have to type or do a topic or write about a
mhm,
specific topic. And my best friend was Grammarly.com, just
mm,
figuring out where's the comma, um, what is
mhm,
this the right word to use? Is this sentence good? Are there any misspelling errors? And because I was worried so much about having the perfect paper, that it was like I am not going to turn this in until it's 100% on Grammarly.com. But what I will say, what's kind of helped me deal with that weird, or develop that idea of trying to be perfect, is just going back to what it means to be a human being. Similar to what we had earlier, which is that no human being is perfect. Each human being has its own strengths and weaknesses.
mhm.
And why follow something else or someone else when you can just follow yourself? Wait, no. Or why follow someone or something else when you can just follow what your heart says? And the thing is, when we're learning and growing, yes, we have our good days, but then we also have those bad days, and it's okay. As simple as, well, it's not as simple as that, but like I guess my thoughts are just that it's okay to not be perfect, and it's just one of the things that it comes with what it means to be a human being. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
something you relate to, but like, I just feel like that's kind of what's helped me in the sense where as much as I want to be the best, everyone has a process and it's a journey. And yes, the destination is great, but everyone has a unique journey to get to their end goal. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with that. I don't know. I feel like I'm just gonna go in rambles, but yeah,
It's hard to have a good day every day, and it's hard to be, productive every day or on your best behavior. So I know that, and that's again. So thank you for reminding me also that that's what makes us human. Our mistakes and our ups and downs and our cycles. It's always a challenge.
for sure. Now, a couple of questions before I let you go. The first thing is, you were very helpful a couple of days ago when I was talking a bit about how there was someone who or made me feel like my podcast wasn't good enough. And I, I've noticed how there's two types of mindsets to have. There's the I need to prove other people wrong, or I need to prove myself right. Where do you align in that little debate? Because as a creative person, you do have challenges. Some people may not like your work, but then at the same time, even though you know what you're worth, so and obviously there's that learning aspect when it comes to creativity. So it's just about proving to yourself that even during those bad times, that you're reminding yourself that you are good and that there's a reason why you're here. Do you feel like you fall more into the I need to prove people wrong case, or do you feel like you need to go into the look, people have their opinions, but I just need to continue to prove myself right and that I belong in this field?
I think both. They're similar, um, like opposite faces of the same coin. Because as successful as I've been with poetry, I didn't know someone who was doing that. So I just kept doing what I was doing. And you'd be surprised to know that I've heard so many comments along the way and so many discouragements, things like, oh, if you were so smart, why aren't you in medicine? Or why didn't you do something different? Or, oh, that's just a hobby, it doesn't pay anything. So there are little hurtful things said, and it sticks with us in a way, but it also just makes us prove ourselves right every time, because this is something I feel called to do, as in it is a passion of mine, and it's now becoming, a career and a job and something that does pay and something that I'm hoping to continue to do for many years. So I would say I have a great track record with myself in that, I can go back and say, oh, you did that. Like, wow, that's so brave. And you're so young and you didn't know how to do it, but you still did. So I hope that, you too can remind yourself why you love doing what you do and why it's worth it, even if other people don't see value in it. And that almost always happens with any creative field or creative person, because the culture around us just does not nurture creativity. It's easier to be like everyone else than it is to do your own thing.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add before we move on to the last move to the last question is, I think lately I've been focusing more on proving myself right as opposed to proving people wrong. So I'm kind of more into one area where you look into both. And the reason why I say that is just because not everyone understands the why behind what you do. And so like, and unfortunately, it's one of those things where if I focus too much on trying to prove certain people right or certain people wrong, then I feel like I'm wasting more energy, because who knows what their interpretation or or what they want from me. As I mean, if they don't tell me, how am I supposed to know? Or they're probably never gonna tell me, and it's just one of those, like, it's a guessing game. Like, maybe they want this, maybe they want that, and then I find myself going away from my mission just to please certain people.
Mm.
And so that's why I feel like I moved to the proving myself right, because I know what I want to do. Sure, I'm not perfect or Joe Rogan or one of the best podcasters in the world, but I know that I have a unique philosophy when it comes to interviewing people, and I love being able to interact with people. So,
Mm.
speaking of interacting with people, as much as I love talking to you, I want to ask, I know we have to wrap up, so I want to ask you one more question, which
Sure.
is, everyone has fears that are holding them back from being their best self.
Mm.
And I know that now there are also other fears as well. Like I'm afraid of spiders. That's not something that will ever. I mean, I'm trying. I did see a video on spiders the other day, which kind of gave me hope. But there's also certain fears that you know that once you overcome this, or once you overcome these fears, that it can unlock you or help you become a much better person. So for example, even though I have a podcast, I actually am still scared of talking to people, because with podcasting you have a plan, like you know what to talk about. But then if you ask me to go and hang out with someone or talk to someone just for fun, I don't think I'll be able to do that. And so that's something I hope to do, just because when it comes to connecting with people and engaging with people, you're going to be meeting people with all different background stories. And so, interestingly enough, even though I have a podcast, I'm still worried about talking to people. So I hope to overcome that so I can be more outgoing and engaging. As someone involved in poetry and creativity, what are some of your fears that you hope to overcome in the future?
Excellent question to to land on. I think a fear of mine is maybe taking risks, big risks. And um, that's something I'm also working on and trying to reframe, because I have taken risks in the past, but maybe, we don't think of them as such in the moment. And so it can also be, I think, an immigrant tendency to want to stay in the safe no matter what. And that means resisting doing the hard things, or resisting moving again, or resisting something that will be a challenge. So I'm trying to welcome challenges and to welcome risk, and to trust the process, to trust being creative, to keep doing what I'm doing. I really believe that we can't compare ourselves to anyone, because our journey is unique to us and we have to find ourselves. Um, I'm also an only child, and I know that um, I'm afraid of just not having enough people to deeply connect with. So I'm proud of the friendships that I've made, and I hope that those also grow. So it's interesting, I think we're always aware of our fears and we're trying to work on them, but sometimes we need a push or two. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely trust the process and know that every story is unique. It's not going to be an easy journey, but it's one of those where we know that at some point we just have to continue to push ourselves. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it's going to be rewarding at the end of the day, or whenever you accomplish that goal. But Sarah, I know you are a very busy person, but I just want to say thank you so much for joining the podcast. I've learned so much from you, especially with regards to your creativity journey, or just especially being a good person and with religion. And I hope to continue having more Muslims on the podcast, because it's hard, I think, especially in different cultures where being vulnerable is seen as more of a weakness as opposed to strength. So I'm very grateful that in a way that there are people like you who, yes, you're Muslim, but you also focus a lot or care a lot about storytelling. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope we get to meet in person someday.
Thank you so much, Hamza. It's really an honor to be on your podcast, and such a wonderful, eye-opening conversation. So thank you.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.